Hey guys, welcome to my first Age of Charlemagne video. In this one I'll be showing you the various units in the upcoming Charlemagne campaign, but before getting into the full rosters I want to show you a couple of things. First of all, you can only use Charlemagne factions against other Charlemagne ones in custom battles and multiplayer. CA decided to split these, unlike what they did with the last Roman DLC, so this means you can only play factions like the Kingdom of Asturias against a faction like Charlemagne and not against the Huns or the Sassanid Empire. You may also know that CA mentioned that there will be 300 new units in this piece of DLC. You may not believe this at first because their unit rosters are actually quite small, and you will see that in a second. This is because the units in this campaign are culture unique instead of faction unique. This means that minor factions of the same cultures as the major ones get exactly the same unit, without any exceptions. 8 of these cultures have a playable faction in this campaign, and these cultures are Viking, Saxon, Lombard, Spanish, English, Frankish, Muslim and Avar. This means that, for example, the Kingdom of Asturias has the exact same units as the Spanish Duchy of Pamplona, which is a minor faction. However, there are 6 cultures which are not represented by a playable faction in this campaign, and these are Breton, Roman, Slavic, Irish, Pictish and Welsh. These factions do have their own unique unit rosters though, which is why I will also show you those new units at the end of the video. These other cultures are not playable in the custom battles obviously. Also, there are a lot of new units which have copies for multiple factions. For example, the Levy Spearman unit is available to multiple factions like the Avars, Charlemagne, Asturias and the Lombards. Although the name and the stats are the same for every faction, the game will still see them as 4 separate units because they have their own look and unit card, and you can easily see the difference on the screen right now between these 4 factions. You can see that at their shields, their faces, the weapons, they differ in appearance. This is the case for a lot of units for a lot of factions, and these points may be the reason why you find the rosters a bit underwhelming. Just keep in mind that all the units, even though they have the same name, are looking unique for each faction though, so that's pretty cool. Now let's get straight into the rosters for each faction. First of all, the main faction for this DLC, the Kingdom of Charlemagne, located in the middle of France. The Franks have the most extensive unit roster in this campaign, with both excellent infantry and melee cavalry. They are completely lacking shock cavalry, slingers and X-infantry though. The Palace Guard is a very heavy spear unit with excellent stats, and the Palace Guardsmen form one of the best general bodyguards in this campaign. They also have access to the best cavalry out there in the form of Schola Cavalry and the Schola Knights. Mounted archers and mounted swordsmen are decent mid-tier units, usable for the Franks as well to support their elite cavalry. The second faction is the Kingdom of Asturias, which is the playable Spanish faction in this campaign. Asturias is a very balanced faction with decent spear infantry, excellent sword infantry, amazing melee cavalry and skirmishers, however they are completely lacking shock cavalry and long range missile units. Ambushers are quite unique as they are one of the few, if not the only guerrilla unit in this campaign, and Royal Guardsmen are an excellent high tier stable sword unit. The Spanish Royal Knights are one of the best melee cav units out there, and they also have good skirmishers in the form of noble skirmishers, and the mounted version of those are the Gnats. The Avars, or the Avars, I don't know how to pronounce it to be honest, are the third faction in this campaign, starting out at the very east of the map. They have one of the smaller rosters completely lacking melee cavalry, low tier sword infantry and javelins. However, this is the only faction which has access to horse archers in the Age of Charlemagne campaign. The cavalry is great in general as well, and they also have a good infantry unit in the form of Avar noble swordsmen. It is the only one but a very reliable one for the faction. The tribesmen, which is a good spear unit, does give them some room for variety in infantry as well however, and the various Avar horse archers have very high missile damage and are able to perform charges as well, just like the elite noble Avar noble lancer shock cavalry unit, which is also extremely powerful. The fourth faction is the Emirate of Cordoba, the only playable Muslim faction in this campaign. They have a very balanced roster with access to amazing spears and swords, decent missiles and great cavalry. One of the highlights of this roster is the elite Umayyad Guardsmen, and also of course the Umayyad Guard Cavalry, which is the general unit. However, the Andalusian units and the armored cavalry are extremely powerful as well. They also have access to good skirmisher cav in the form of Berber Raiders and Berber Gnats. The fifth faction is the Kingdom of the Danes. This is a very unique Viking faction starting out in Denmark, which completely lacks any form of cavalry. Their infantry is very good however, with access to the best ex-infantry units in this entire campaign. The Housecarls general unit is an extremely powerful aggressive unit, and the same goes for ex-herdmen and big axes. The armored archers and Viking hunters can provide good skirmishing support as well. The Danes also caused the return of the Levy freemen, however this time without the OP precursor weapons. The Kingdom of the Lombards, who are starting in northern Italy, has the most balanced roster in this campaign and is able to bring every type of unit except for slingers and horse archers. They have decent units overall, especially in the cavalry and melee infantry department. For example, Castalled swordsmen and guardsmen are good high tier units, and the Lombard clubmen give them access to a very aggressive unit as well. Meanwhile, the Gestalt Knights are extremely powerful melee cavalry, and the Lombards are also able to bring shock cav in the form of Lombard Lancers. The 7th faction is the Kingdom of Mercia, which is the English playable faction. They have a somewhat limited roster but access to a good mix of infantry. They are lacking variety for cavalry however, but the units they are able to bring are very decent. An example is the Royal Tegnans unit, which is a very stable high tier sword infantry. The Royal Horsemen and Select Archers are powerful support tools for the English as well. The last playable faction of this DLC is Westphalia, which is the Saxon faction from this campaign. They have a good mix of spear, melee and ex-infantry combined with good skirmishers, however they are lacking heavily in cavalry. Westphalia is able to bring cheap warhounds to the field as well, and other good units are the extremely powerful hard cavalry and the decent CX warriors. Another cool thing about this faction is that all their units are completely unique, just like the English. Now let's take a look at the unit rosters for the minor factions with other cultures. First of all, the Slavs. The Slavic minor factions are able to bring a good mix of infantry with very powerful axes. These are supported by 2 good cavalry units as well, however they are unable to bring any sword or shock cavalry at all. Special units here are the large shields, but the Slav champions and Slav royal cavalry are also very powerful units for these minor factions. Next up are the Roman units, which are used by various Italian factions. This roster is filled with extremely powerful cavalry combined with decent but very limited infantry. These factions have decent mid-tier infantry in the form of Scutatoi and Scutatoi spearmen, but their cavalry might be the best in the campaign with units like Tagmata cavalry and Dux Guard. The Irish, Welsh and Pictish faction share a lot of basic units, including the best dog unit in the campaign, Gazehounds, however they also have a couple of unique ones who are very special. The Welsh, for example, have access to Welsh longbowmen, the amazing Tulu cavalry unit and the Royal Horsemen. The Picts have a very unique looking infantry, with units like sword warriors and Pictish archers. However, the Pictish are also able to bring the only crossbow unit in this entire campaign, which is of course very good and cool, and Pictish nobles are also one of the best cavalry units in this campaign. Finally, the Irish also have some unique units of course. Examples are the Current and the very powerful King's Warband and King's Vienna. Last but not least, there are 3 special units which are faction unique. The first one is the Papal Guard. This is a very strong spear unit available to, of course, the Papal States, and the Armorican Knights and Armorican Cavalry are units which are usable by the Brittany faction in the west of France. As you can see, the rosters are smaller than the standard Attila ones, however they are still very unique. Almost all the units in there are faction unique, and the ones who are not still have their own unique skin for every single culture. I already finished the campaign with the Kingdom of Asturias, and I never felt like I was lacking unit diversity. It was more about outplaying your enemy with the units you have, not just upgrading to the better ones all the time. You are also able to recruit your units very early in the campaign, which also causes the AI to build better units more frequently. There's less upgrading than the standard campaign as well. You can pretty much build most of your units at the end of the campaign. Overall, I really enjoyed the unit diversity in this DLC, especially if you consider this DLC is costing the same as the last Roman campaign pack and the DLCs for Total War Rome 2. This is not a completely new campaign like Fall of the Samurai, however for the price it brings you a lot of new content, and that also includes a lot of new units. I hope you enjoyed this overview of the units in Age of Charlemagne. Be sure to check out my video about the free DLC if you haven't already, the link to that will be in the description. Thanks for watching and I'll see you all next time, bye bye.